Liz, thank you for being with us today on the Rising Beyond podcast.
Yay, thank you for having me. It's so good to see you
Yeah,
again.
so we are talking all about money and how
Yay.
financial abuse continues, looks different post separation. And so, what do you see as kind of the common areas where this is going to show up, and why does it show up now?
Great questions. Well, I think the first thing that comes to mind for me is I didn't even realize that was part of the abuse I was in was financial abuse until I was in post separation. So the physical and emotional stuff was so what word am I trying to come up with? It overtook. It was harder to identify the other things going on. So because those were what I was dealing with most often, I didn't realize until I moved out and wasn't as close in proximity, and also started to to protect myself and do the gray rocking strategy, which really works. And that I realized, oh, this person is still trying to hurt me, but in a different way. um, and so I think why it still happens is because we've talked about this before, and I've talked about and written about this. Abuse does not stop at the decree.
Mm-hmm.
When people say, "Oh, now that the papers are signed, how are you feeling?" and I'm like, the same. Like now, that piece of paper that got signed by the judge didn't do a lot, but it did do something, and that's where later on we can talk about like why we start recording things. But um, I think that like once they can't get their hands on you, or their words are not as hurtful, they're not impacting you as much. That's a way. Oh, well, I will use money to control the situation, because at the end of the day, it's always about control.
Yeah. Yep. And since they don't have you day to day the same way, there's just one way they can do it.
Right. And often it's via your children.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that I'm sure there are some people in abusive relationships without kids, and there's a lot of money struggles because a partner becomes dependent on them. And then when you can break away and completely be free, then that's a different level of freedom than, like, for me, I feel pretty free of that guy, but also on a pretty consistent basis. I have a whole process in my head that I go through before I ask anything, whether it's about time, exchanges, money, schedule, anything like that. I have to still walk on those eggshells because I have to decide internally, am I able to deal with any response I get? A normal person response, which is a thumbs up or a yes or no, or whatever ridiculousness he may throw my way based on the mood that he's in that I have no control over.
Right. Right. So when there are things, it goes through the kids. So we have talked kind of offline, like extracurricular things come up or medical things come up. These are all areas that are through your children that they still get to touch. They still have an
Mm-hmm.
impact on you. And so many of the women that I work with are like, I'd rather just probably pay for it if I can, because I don't even want to bring it up with him because that's conflict. It's
Right.
scary, right, to bring it up. So what is that process that you go through to bring up, like, hey, you actually owe me X, Y, and Z because in our decree it says A, B, and C.
Mm-hmm. I, because I have found that veering from the decree always results in conflict, I very rarely do. So I was lucky enough to find a dentist who doesn't expect me to pay the whole bill every time. I didn't tell them our whole story, but they obviously get the gist where they'll let me pay my portion because out of pocket medical is to be split 50-50. And for a while, I was paying it, and then sometimes he would Venmo me, and and I knew that these types of things had been an issue in his other divorce and other kid. And in order to not set myself up for that, I asked them, can I pay my portion and you can bill him? And they did it. So I think having a question with any of those practitioners and see what they're willing to do. Some may be like, we have to collect upon you being here, and that's not an option.
Yeah.
But there are some that will work with you.
Yeah. So even reaching out to bypassing your ex-partner and talking to
Mm-hmm.
the providers.
Right, exactly. And for me, I just try to do everything by the book, because if and when that court threat, let me start that again. If and when the court threat actually comes to fruition, I just don't want to have anything I'm trying to scramble about. So here's a good example. My daughter has to get little spacers in her teeth because she's going to need orthodontist sooner rather than later. She asked me, why does daddy never take me to the dentist? And I'm like, I don't know, baby. And that was a whole other conversation. But the point of that comment was, I have to relay everything to him
Mm-hmm.
about what's going on. And I said, when your open enrollment comes up, you're going to need to maybe look into the orthodontic part of that, because she's going to need it soon. Hey, I'm just giving you this information. They ended up charging me. He, in this case, Venmoed me, which I don't typically do that, but it was a small amount that I could have lived without. Um, and then they said, oh, we overcharged you. So I paid him back, even though I could have easily kept that money because he doesn't talk to the dentist and would have never known. But I'm not going to do that. A, because I'm not that kind of person. And B, I'm just never going to do things that aren't above board, because if you don't know if they're keeping record, but if you are and it comes to it, you want to have a nice clean record. Every time you paid for something, every time you requested, every time it was denied, and then you requested it. And my lawyer, a long time ago, when I asked him about things like this, I said, am I supposed to just pay for court every single time he doesn't do something in the decree? And he said, no, he goes, you know, you will eventually have to do an enforcement,
Yeah.
but make it worth your time and money. So just keep a really solid running list. And when you have to go do an enforcement of some kind, you will have everything there. So that's why keeping records is really important.
Yeah, because we know that very often they will hide money. Their records will benefit them in some way. And so this allows you to kind of, with not even just like your little ledger, but even with receipts of like, oh, here's the payment, here's where went on my credit card, here's all of these things, um,
Mm-hmm.
ready to go.
Right. And it feels like it can be a waste of time. It won't be. I recently was in a lawsuit against my ex-husband with his first ex-wife, and it was all started with a dentist bill. And it turned into a really, really, really expensive court case. And she kept everything in order. And he provided nothing. In that case, it was helpful, but not helpful enough, because when you make it all the way to court, it all depends on your judge. So I don't know, Sybil, you may cut this out because I don't feel like that. I think it's important to do your due diligence, but I also think it's important to be realistic about it. That may or may not get you what you want.
Yep.
So do it, but also you are dealing with a person and a system that are not in your favor generally. So these are some of my personal and recent experiences with having to talk about some of those out of pocket medical costs. Another example, yesterday, somebody said, are you thinking about putting your daughter into this private school? And I said, right now she's thriving in her public school. I'll cross that bridge when we get there, when she gets a little older and it becomes time for state testing and all of that. And I said, and mostly it's because I don't want to deal with the back and forth of the payment issues with her dad when I know she's thriving right now. I will cross that bridge on her behalf if and when I have to.
Yeah. Yeah. And so as you are, because I know so many of the women I'm working with are really financially struggling. And they're like, gosh, I need that $30. I need these monies. And so
Mm-hmm.
it makes it really hard, but it does add to that level of conflict. So reporting is important. Do you recommend any specific way of kind of reporting, sending the email to your ex-partner of like, hey, based on the decree, I pay out of pocket, you pay me in 30 days or anything like that. How would you, I guess, go about having those communications with your ex?
It's one of three ways. It's either email, text, or in the court appointed app, which we use, app close, which I like. It's free. It works. I guess it's accepted by courts and stuff. Um, Luckily, with the dentist, we've got it worked out where I don't even have to communicate with him. Sometimes they reach out to me and I'll say, hey, the dentist is trying to reach you for this, and that's fine. But when it comes to other costs like um, ballet or swim or any of those types of things, I I just pick and choose my battles. I'll write an email or a text that says, "Hey, I'm putting her in gymnastics. It's this much. It's on these days. They're my days. I know you're not taking her to swim anymore. Would you like to pay for part of this?" Because it says in our decree that he doesn't have to pay for non-agreed upon extracurriculars. So I'm not expecting that money, but
Yeah.
I am asking because I also want to show that there's an open dialogue here about our daughter, about everything. Um, Sometimes I ask a question and I am met with something ugly, like that's what child support is for. And sometimes I'm met with ghosting, which is also fine. But I feel like this isn't very helpful. I just, I, Here's what I do. I keep it brief, cordial, and if I don't get a response or I get a response I didn't want, I just don't respond. I want to know emotionally that I set myself up to be able to handle any response and that financially I could handle what I signed up for. I'm not going to sign her up for something that I'd have to take her out of if he didn't pay me. You know
Yeah.
what I mean?
Yep.
So it's the back end is like you have no control over what they're going to do, but it's a lot of heavy lifting on the front end of an ask because you've got to word it correctly, try to time it correctly, and then do all of your recording so that if you ever have to report it, you have it. So I think it's just really surrendering to the fact that any request or talk about money to avoid conflict, you have to just make sure that you're in a good headspace and did all of your homework.
Yes. Yes. It's like making sure that you are only the only thing you can control is your half of the deal, like the way you're asking. And so if you can feel really good about how you put yourself forward, that's about what we can do. And then if it is, you copied and pasted from the court order, like they actually owe you this money via court, based on the court order. Yep, you document that because they didn't do it. And you document the next
Mhm.
one and you document the next one. I would like to go, if you can clear this up, what is child support for? Because I think we hear that a lot of like, that's what child support's for.
From my understanding of child support, is it is to keep the child in the same place and lifestyle that they were at before. It's so that not too much on their end has to change. Um, is that what you hear from other people? What their um, attorneys and stuff are saying?
I think so. It is so hard because very often there's just that boom, like that huge shift, right? In
Mhm.
especially if one partner had full financial control and you were very reliant on them,
Mhm.
to where you lived in a big house, big backyard, cat, dog,
Right.
white picket fence, all that, and now you're living in an apartment.
Mhm. Right. So when I think of child support, I think that that comes in and it helps pay for my mortgage because we can stay in our same neighborhood and she can stay at her school. I think that it pays for the food that I give her most of the time because she's with me most of the time. The birthday presents and birthday parties we go to, all the things, the clothes I have to buy her. But when she needs $20 for her, school lunch account, I'm just not going to ask him because I know that he'll probably say that. And also because what child support is defined as is it's not actually defined anywhere. I'm just going to assume, okay, food at lunch is going to be this and all that to say, I don't really know. I just had to decide in my mind what that is for, and that he is not going to be able to control that. But I know in my heart of hearts that I make sure that she lives in a good, in her same house, at her same school, and has everything she needs. And it's because I provide for her, and there is some money coming in from her dad as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I wish that it was really well defined, but it's not really well defined. And so, but I've heard that from so many women, like, that's what child support's for. It's like, no, actually, that's not. So if y'all are listening and your parenting plan is super loosey goosey around finances, then you have less legs to stand on. So if you have not created that parenting plan yet, make sure that you are more specific on finances
Mhm.
around extracurriculars and medical and all of those things, because the loopholes is where they get to exploit left and right.
And they will. And that's a really good point, Sybil, is spend the time while you're still pre-decree writing those things out. They may seem tedious. You may get some eye rolls even from your own attorney. It will pay off in the end, because then you have that document that you can always go back to. And so in my decree, we made sure that we had out of pocket medical, we had uh, what's the word I'm looking for? Extracurriculars, summer camps, like anything that you can think of that your kid needs and they only get more expensive, put it in there, because those are your legs to stand on,
Yes.
as you said.
Yeah.
So be tedious, be annoying.
Yes, because then if communicating is tough and you have a harder time setting boundaries, guess what? You can copy and paste that right from your plan, right from the decree, and be like, boop,
Absolutely.
this is what was ordered, and we all signed on it. Send.
Yep. And the meticulousness of the pre planning will pay off in your post separation issues. Will have, it's like the exercise has already been done. So it's just a copy and paste, put it in a nice document, and take it to court when you have to. So it's a worthy exercise despite the time or it being annoying.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was just thinking it might be helpful to shift the conversation of, if you have never really been in charge of finances at all because you weren't allowed to be. And now we're saying, hey, record all this, write all this down, record all your expenses, do all these things. That might feel really outside of your wheelhouse.
Mhm.
What are some, I guess, just basic financial strategies for someone who has gone from having zero access to any of that information to now you are fully in charge of your life and your children's lives financially?
Great question. It is really overwhelming. So I just want to say, if you're feeling that overwhelm and that disconnect from what was and what is and lost in the middle, that's so normal. I have a really wonderful client who said that we were taking our whole plan piece by piece. I said, we're baby stepping this because it's so overwhelming. And we started with just a conversation around what's coming in and what's going out. So if you have an advisor or a friend or even just a piece of paper, just start taking some notes. The main thing that you want to figure out right away is what is coming in and what is going out. And you can be, I would say at the beginning of this process, be as, go back to the word meticulous, and nitty gritty as you can be, because we swipe our cards for fast food, for coffee, for something quick at Target all the time, and we don't realize how much is going out. And we really need to start paying attention to those habits so we can start shifting the way we think and swipe and save. But all of that can be a very overwhelming exercise.
Mm-hmm.
So I think really narrowing it down to just a list. You're just writing things down on a piece of paper.
Yeah. Money brings up a lot of stuff for people based on their experiencing growing up. Maybe they were always lacking. Maybe it was paycheck to paycheck. Maybe it was the feast and famine. Like, they would have, tons of things and go out to eat and do things, and then they had no money and there was a lot of stress in the household. So my guess is a lot of feelings are coming up as well around even just writing down like went to Starbucks.
Right, right. And that's the thing to remember too, is to give yourself a lot of that grace, because you're gonna have a lot of feelings every time you write that down. And some of them might be really ugly feelings like guilt or shame. But the exercise is meant to be objective. I'm just writing some numbers down just to get an idea. And you don't have to share them with anybody, right? So I think this is another exercise in self-compassion when you're going through something like this. So much is changing all at once, including this massive part of your life that maybe wasn't your responsibility before and is now, and you maybe don't have somebody showing you the ropes. So just trying to like take it piece by piece, and every time you sit down to start the budget or the task, the list, remind yourself nothing is wrong. I'm not wrong. This isn't wrong. I'm not bad. This isn't bad. This just is. This is just numbers on paper to give me data points.
Yep.
Period.
Just information. It is just information. And if you're really struggling, like many, this is not just if you've been in an abusive relationship, but to make decisions, usually there's a piece of if we can't make a decision, we don't have enough information to make it. So there's the added
Right.
piece of you've been told that you're irresponsible with money, that you're a POS, that you can't do anything right. Like, so there's all of those things too, where you start to doubt yourself. But a lot of the time it's because we don't actually have the information. So this is just giving you the information.
Right. Right. Attempting to take the emotion out of it will be a really important part of that data gathering. And if it becomes emotional mid project, stop. This isn't homework. This is just starting the process to get that budget part of it going, because once you get your head around that, you can be really excited and proud of yourself. And then you can talk about something that feels more outside your wheelhouse or feels scarier when the thought pops into your mind, like retirements and 401ks and all those words that you never had to think about or that you don't know or whatever. There's no need to jump to the, hardest parts of this part of the process.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if you can do this for you, writing down your expenses where it's just information, you can also then write down the expenses that they owe you minus emotion. It's just money they owe you. Like, and I clearly say, I know it's easier said than done, because F them that they have left you in this struggling position and they're not paying child support on time and they're not reimbursing you and all of those pieces. But the number, just writing it down and keeping that record, it's just data.
Right. Right. And it's data that you may eventually need, and it will be in your favor. When you talked about not paying child support on time, do you find that a lot of people that talk to you are not going through the office of the attorney generals and having it going that way?
Half and half. So some are using the child support office, and still there's all the little finagling. Like if they can exploit the system in some way, they will exploit the system in some way. So maybe they had early retirement, so then their wages can't be garnished, or they're starting a new business and their reporting is not accurate, or they're going back to school just so they don't have to pay you. So I think these are areas that we see actually pretty frequently, is like where wages can't be garnished and
and
it's just not then paid.
so in Texas, my experience was my ex-husband would not report where he worked, so they couldn't garnish it. So it was up to him to pay each month. And he paid whenever he wanted. But he paid every month because there is recourse. There is actual recourse for him not paying. Now, he could certainly go and do all those other things and get out of having to pay. But at this point, I think the only reason he ended up following that rule was because I could have enforced that he wasn't paying it, and he could have had to pay interest since it was in arrears and potentially had jail time. Is it similar in Colorado?
Yes, and
Right. Always yes and.
so yes, and do they actually, right? Then it's like your cost to file the motion for contempt, and that's going to be like 90 days out. And are they going to pay it right at that 90 days? Maybe. Or are they going to come in with their sob story and be like, well, she just keeps taking me back to court, so I have no money. And then it depends who's on the stand. So
Right.
sometimes that's successful. So if y'all are out there listening, you're like, yeah, this is the dumbest thing ever. I literally wasted the money I would have gotten by going to court. Yes. Yes, that
Mm-hmm.
is possible.
And this, yeah, and I think this is where just keeping account of everything so that when you have to go to court, it's maybe worth it
Yeah.
versus having to go once and then again and then again, and then it ends up costing you and you would have been better off without it. And oh man, this is a whole other podcast, but just the people on the other side of us, the court people, understanding that it's a financial abuse tactic
Yes.
to not pay you and then make you pay for them not paying you.
Yeah.
And
And
I think that there needs to be more understanding extended to people going through that.
right. And that it is the victim's job to prove that this happened. So it's like so completely different, right, than anything else. But the burden is on the victim of.
Right, right. I have to do all the homework. I have to file the motions. I have to pay the money. And then it's not even a guaranteed outcome. And that's really unfortunate. This kind of brings me back to what we talked about, the budgeting. Along with budgeting is saving. We've really got to start thinking about what does healthy saving look like, because if we can't count on the child support or the half of daycare or medical expenses or gymnastics, then we have to be able to survive with what we do have. And that could look really different and be incredibly stressful and scary.
Yeah.
But again, going back to data, what do I need to save? What can I spend? How can I make this as emotionless, at least at this point, as possible?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it is really tricky. And so, you all listening, Liz and I have had some brainstorming sessions offline, um, specifically around the financial impacts and the financial abuse within our legal system. And so I am happy to have a little, again, we can't go as long as we go normally, like on a normal basis. Like, we can't do that because nobody needs to hear all of our ramblings and venting. But yeah, what are some of the ideas that, gosh, and so y'all listening, these haven't come to fruition, but we've had some brainstorming sessions about what is needed. Because guess what? You might have the idea that will spark something. So yeah, let's have just a short little conversation about what in this ideal magic world, we have a magic wand, um, needs to happen so that the financial abuse, specifically around the family court system, doesn't happen.
My first, the place that I go to first in my mind is your family attorneys. I became friendly with and close to the law firm. They were kind of a small boutique one. Thank goodness I could afford them, and they were super kind. And they, at the end of all of this, I said, would you guys be interested in if I kind of give you a little bit of information on what it's like to be divorcing an abusive person? And they were interested in it. And so I wanted to put together some kind of presentation, or maybe not a curriculum, not yet, but trying to explain what it looks like when there's a power dynamic imbalance like that, and um, how they can be an ally with that information. It's like being a trauma informed in a way a trauma informed therapist or teacher. And this way you're like a, it is kind of being like a trauma informed attorney, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Yeah, and them understanding, because right, this is how they where they get their money too, right? But it's like how, because one of the ways that these cases just keep on going, and I've witnessed this, like actual firsthand witness this, is the less ethical of attorneys that your ex-partners are going to hire, right? Because birds of a feather flock together. They will find attorneys that fit their, I say this super loosely because I don't even know if I can say this, their value system. I don't know if I can say value system because it feels so not valued, but, and their whole goal is to keep family court going. Right. So there was a case and I was supposed to be testifying. I didn't wind up testifying for many different reasons, but because I had to hang out there, I was literally just like in on the benches outside of the courtroom, just reading my book because I had to be there forever. And ex-partner came out. They had no idea who I was, some random lady in the hallway. And attorney came out and they were having a conversation about my case right in front of me. And he was ready to settle on a few things. One of them was financial. And his attorney said, well, and he was, you could tell he was like at peace with settling. And she said, well, if you're comfortable with her getting a win there,
Hmm.
then we can settle. He got all, well, no, I don't think it's a win. I don't, and he got all riled up. They decided not to settle on those issues, even though he was totally good. He was ready to go, ready to settle. And the attorney was like, no, I need to make more money here. Let me get this going.
Yeah. I have had nothing but experience with my ex hiring people of his caliber, in
Yeah.
quotes, people that will, take his money and keep fighting, even
Yes.
when they know, when everybody knows that it's frivolous and wasteful and meant to be an intimidation tactic,
Yes.
especially when in the case where they have more money than you. And in this case, my ex has more than me, and he lets me know it in any way that he can when he can.
Yeah.
And that's where the emotional fortitude of, comes in for yourself. Like, I have to remember that I am not those things he says I am. I do not identify as those things he says I am. And again, the labor is all on you. The labor was to keep the peace, and now the emotional heavy lifting is to keep the peace inside while they're still slinging insults and lawsuits. And this is where your therapists, Sybil, really, really come in handy. So I think pivoting that, I think the next place where we could think about getting help in the court system is not only talking to our family lawyers, but also the people that are there helping us along, helping therapists helping us to stay strong in the face of ongoing abuse.
Yeah. Yeah. And, a lot of us and don't know anything about this. Right. So it's that education piece for therapists because we're not really trained in domestic violence. Um, Therapists don't typically use the term narcissistic abuse the same way. Um, whatever, whatever, I get it. And so they're not as aware of the financial piece and the financial abuse and what the family court looks like. Something we are doing here too, kind of again, like we need to not just like go one direction, right? There's like all of these different ways, and we need to like surround survivors with knowledge and support everywhere. But something we are looking at doing here in Colorado, and I can't speak to a ton of it yet because I don't think it's even been put out there yet, but more transparency of the cost that evaluators and other professionals, I say that loosely, within the family court process are charging the survivors and the ex-partners for their services, because the judges actually don't know. So they don't know. Like,
Wow.
they're like, yes, we need this eval. We need that. We need this. It's like, oh, hey, this eval is $26,000 for this one PRE eval, right? And then you want the reunification therapist that's not covered by insurance. And then we need this, and then we need that, and we need all of these things. And so some of these experts, y'all didn't see that, but I did some air quotes. They thrive when there is not transparency, when it's vague, when things are hidden. But if they have to say, oh, yes, I'm charging $26,000, what the F are you doing? Right? And then your report is subpar and you didn't do all of the assessments and you didn't do all the things. So that's something that we've kind of seen here that we would like to change, a little bit more transparency for those professionals in the field.
Yeah, and I like what you said too about surrounding survivors with support, but it's knowledgeable support, because we all know that we've had a family member who loves us say some super shitty
Yeah.
stuff that doesn't actually feel helpful, but we know that there are supports. Same with therapists who don't understand this space enough. There are support, but they're not knowledgeable enough to be actually helpful.
Yeah.
Same with the court system, same with police officers, who are may or may not be trained in how to handle a domestic dispute. And so I think it's a systemic issue, and it's because of big operations outside of this one person aren't trained enough on the ins and outs of the abuse dynamic,
Yeah.
the power dynamic. And I don't think that every single person in every single profession needs to go back to school to learn this, but I think there are resources out there that they could use. I literally think that, I'll cut this long, what's it called? The Body Keeps the Score should be mandatory reading for everyone in any profession. It's so important.
Yeah. It's on our resource
So I think
list on
things like
Rising
that.
Beyond. It is there because it is really good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I am, again, it's like that knowledgeable support, but there's also, bias out there that women are lesser than, and there are males who are experiencing financial abuse. There are males that are experiencing domestic violence, and it is largely female. And when I'm working with my male survivors, there is typically a difference within the financial realm. So I think there's bias against women pretty strongly within our family court system. And this just popped in my head too. What's fascinating. So I did a training. I don't actually know when I did this training, but recently, and it was on teen dating violence. And when I was doing the research on teen dating violence, I think it was 63% of all teen dating violence relationships, there was financial and economic abuse as teens. And when there were other forms of coercion, because teen dating violence is harder to measure because it's bidirectional, there's lesser power and control. Some of it is like, y'all are little babies and you have no skill in conflict resolution. So sometimes it is not those elements of power and control, but when there were, I want to say it was like between 83 and 86%, there was financial control within the relationship as teens.
Wow.
And that those impact them for a lifetime. So it was like if teens experience financial abuse, and this was women specifically, they will have a harder time earning money in their future.
And well, this goes back to the patriarchy now, doesn't it? That even teen boys know how to use that economic power and to coerce,
Yes.
to be in control. And it may not always even be done in malice.
Nope.
You know, I think that we teach our boys that they're strong and powerful and that they are the ones, and to be a man is to do this, this, and this. So it may just be really misguided, but it turns into coercion and abuse pretty quickly. And the lasting effects of that are very
Yeah.
unfortunate.
Yep. Yeah. I was fascinated reading all the financial pieces because I was like, they have like no money. Like, how is this working? But it was those smaller, is like keeping them, preventing these teens from going to work, right? Having the argument right before they're going to go to work. So then they're late to work. Because if they, oh, work's more important to you, that, guy at your work is more important to you than figuring this out with me, kind of thing. So that's a lot of where it started. But then there's also like, who's buying the gas, who's driving the person around, who's paying for the food. Um, there are all these little elements of financial abuse in like this smaller scale in our high schools. Yeah, it was
Ugh, that makes me
fascinating.
really sad.
It was fascinating to, because that's not
Yeah.
my area of expertise per se, but when I was learning all about it, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is fascinating. And it makes sense why
Wow.
98% of all survivors of domestic violence have experienced financial abuse.
Right. Right. Started when they were young, most likely.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So, yeah.
Um, yeah. And I was just going to, well, I was going to just kind of talk about some actionable items
Yes. I was going to
to,
ask, like, what should we do now as we wrap this up?
yeah.
What should we do?
Um, yeah. I mean, I think that it's really taking account of what are you in control of, and remembering that that's all you're in control of and that that's okay. So the first thing is I can control where I swipe my card. I can control what I write down. I can control how and what I send in a message about money. And I can prepare myself to be in control of the feelings when that response comes back. And so I think I've used this term a bunch today. It's emotional heavy lifting on your part.
Yeah.
It is worth it. And your children will see that you can handle hard things and that mommy's not always on the phone freaking out or yelling at dad, or it's not that you can't have those feelings, but I think when we employ the discipline in ourselves, it rubs off on our kids and they get to see how we can gracefully um, regulate our own feelings and emotions and still move forward in a positive way. So there's a lot to be said about those things, but it starts with just what am I in control of?
Yeah. Yep. And we are not in control of them hiding finances. We are not in control of how they manage their debt now. We don't have any of that. So it really is, what can you do, learning, right? Like, what do you need to learn to do this in a different way? And for me, learning things just makes me feel so empowered. So learning about finances, learning about just the basics can make you feel really empowered in
Mm-hmm.
making decisions.
Um, yeah, no, absolutely. I think that especially when you didn't get any choice in any of the financial matters, having that agency is going to feel really great. Wow, I made that decision to spend or save, and I did it on my own, and I feel good about that. Um, and starting with things like that budget, like you can write it on a piece of paper, but also there's plenty of apps out there. I know people that use the YNAB. Have you heard of this? You
Uh-uh.
need a budget app. Um, a lot of people use the mint.com. Nerd Wallet is a great resource that I go to when I'm thinking about uh, balance
Mm-hmm.
transfers. Anyway, you can cut that out. I don't know. But like there are free and simple resources that you can use. And like you said, like the empowerment of making these choices and decisions on your own, revel in that. It's a big deal.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. And that's the goal, right? That's what was taken from you, is your sense of self, your agency, your autonomy. And this is just one area where you can gain it back. Liz, thank you for being here. We can have hours long discussions on things.
No.
Um, just because we are both passionate about this space and improving it for all of you. So thank you all for listening. Thank you, Liz, for being here, and we'll catch you on the next episode of the Rising Beyond podcast.